2,000 years ago, a man who was one of the wealthiest people in the Roman Empire, personal advisor to an emperor, and one of history's greatest writers, was sentenced to death by the very emperor he had mentored. His name was Seneca, and when the order came to take his own life, he did not beg, he did not panic, and he did not rage against the injustice. He calmly opened his veins, comforted his weeping friends, and spent his final hours discussing philosophy. That kind of composure is not something you are born with. It is something you build through decades of disciplined thinking. Seneca left behind a collection of letters and essays that contain some of the most practical and brutally honest advice ever written about how to live a powerful life. These are not vague platitudes. These are battle-tested strategies from a man who survived exile, political conspiracies, the madness of Emperor Caligula, and the tyranny of Nero. Here are 7 rules from Seneca that will transform how you approach every day. Rule number 1. Guard your time like your life depends on it, because it does. Seneca's most famous work is a short essay called On the Shortness of Life, and its central argument is devastating. He wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. Think about that. Most people do not have a time problem. They have a time management crisis. Seneca watched Roman senators spend entire days at banquets, gambling, and gossip, then complain that life was too short. He saw the same pattern we see today, people pouring hours into social media, binge-watching, pointless arguments, and empty entertainment, and then wondering where the years went. Seneca was relentless on this point. He said that people are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. You lock your doors at night to protect your possessions. You would fight someone who tried to steal your car, but you hand away hours of your irreplaceable life to anyone who asks without a second thought. Every time you say yes to something that does not matter, you are saying no to something that does. Audit your days ruthlessly. Where is your time actually going? And is that where you want your life to go? Rule number 2. Use wealth as a tool, never as a master. Seneca was extraordinarily rich. His fortune was estimated at 300 million sesterces, making him one of the wealthiest men in Rome. His critics called him a hypocrite for preaching Stoic simplicity while living in luxury. But Seneca's position on wealth was more nuanced than his critics understood. He did not teach that money was evil. He taught that attachment to money was a form of slavery. He wrote that wealth is the slave of a wise man and the master of a fool. Seneca enjoyed fine things, but he regularly practiced voluntary poverty, sleeping on hard surfaces, eating the simplest food, and wearing rough clothing for days at a time. He did this not as punishment, but as training, so that if fortune ever took everything away, he would not be destroyed by the loss. And fortune did take everything. When Nero exiled him to Corsica for 8 years, Seneca survived because his happiness was never dependent on what he owned. The lesson is not to reject success or live in deliberate deprivation. It is to build a relationship with money where you control it instead of it controlling you. Can you lose half of what you own tomorrow and still function? If the answer terrifies you, your wealth owns you more than you own it. Rule number 3. Conquer anger before it conquers you. Seneca wrote an entire treatise called On Anger, and he considered anger the most destructive of all emotions. He called it temporary madness and observed that no plague has cost the human race more. He had personal reasons for this conviction. He watched Emperor Caligula execute people on a whim during fits of rage and saw how anger turned powerful men into monsters. Seneca's approach to anger was clinical and practical. He taught that anger is not a spontaneous eruption you cannot control. It is a judgment you make about an event, and that judgment can be interrupted. When someone insults you, the insult is not what makes you angry. Your interpretation of the insult is what makes you angry, and interpretations can be changed. He recommended a specific daily practice. Every evening, review the moments during the day when you felt anger rising. Ask yourself what triggered it, whether the trigger was worth the emotional cost, and how you could respond differently next time. Over weeks and months, this practice rewires your default reactions. Seneca also taught a technique of deliberate delay. When you feel anger surging, do nothing. Wait. The Roman general Athenodorus once advised Augustus Caesar that when angry, he should recite the entire alphabet before speaking. Seneca loved this advice because it recognized that anger loses its power the moment you insert a pause between the provocation and your response. Master that pause, and you master yourself. Rule number 4. Choose your friends as carefully as you choose your future. Seneca believed that the people you surround yourself with shape who you become more than any personal discipline or philosophy ever could. He wrote that associating with people who are restless and unhappy will gradually make you restless and unhappy, just as a person carrying an illness can pass it to those standing nearby. This was not elitism. This was survival strategy. Seneca saw how the Roman social world worked. Men of great potential would fall into circles of excess and moral decay and slowly become unrecognizable. Their ambitions would shrink to match the ambitions of the room they spent the most time in. He told his friend Lucilius to choose someone whose way of life and even whose face and manner of expressing himself please you, and then picture that person always watching over your actions and decisions. This is the concept of the moral exemplar, a living standard you measure yourself against. But the rule cuts both ways. It is not just about finding good company. It is about having the courage to walk away from bad company, even when that company is comfortable, familiar, or popular. Every relationship either lifts you closer to the person you want to become or pulls you further away. There is no neutral ground. Be ruthlessly honest about which direction the people in your life are pulling you. Rule number 5. Treat adversity as your training ground. Seneca spent 8 years in exile on the island of Corsica. He lost political power, physical comfort, and access to everything he had built in Rome. Most men in his position would have been broken by bitterness. Seneca used the exile to write some of his greatest philosophical works. He came back sharper, wiser, and more resilient than before. He wrote that difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body, and he meant it literally. Just as muscles grow only under resistance, character grows only under hardship. A life of unbroken comfort produces a fragile person who collapses at the first real challenge. Seneca pointed to fire as his metaphor. The same fire that melts butter-hardened steel, and the difference is not in the fire but in the material. Your goal is to become steel through deliberate exposure to discomfort and challenge. He also taught that we should prepare for adversity before it arrives. He called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Each morning, briefly consider what could go wrong during the day, not to breed anxiety, but to build readiness. When you have already imagined the worst and mentally rehearsed your response, the actual event has no power to shock you. You have already handled it in your mind. The people who crumble under pressure are not weaker than those who thrive. They are simply less prepared. Make preparation a daily habit, and adversity becomes something you welcome rather than fear. Rule number 6. Make peace with death so you can finally live. Seneca returned to the theme of death more than any other Stoic writer. He was not morbid. He was strategic. He understood that the fear of death is the root of almost every other fear, and that conquering it unlocks a freedom most people never experience. He wrote that the man who has learned to die has unlearned slavery, because nothing in life can threaten someone who has already accepted the one thing everyone fears most. When Nero finally ordered Seneca to take his own life in the year 65, Seneca was ready. He had spent decades preparing for exactly that moment. His friends wept, but Seneca asked them where their philosophy had gone. He reminded them that Nero's cruelty was no surprise and that they had always known this day could come. That composure was not performance. It was the product of a lifetime spent rehearsing the truth of mortality. You do not need to face a death sentence to benefit from this practice. Simply meditating on the fact that you will die, that the people you love will die, and that everything you have built will eventually disappear creates an urgency and a gratitude that transforms ordinary days into extraordinary ones. Seneca said that each day should be treated as if it were your last, not with recklessness, but with intentionality. When you stop assuming you have unlimited time, you stop wasting the time you have. Rule number 7. Stop waiting and start living now. Of all Seneca's teachings, this may be the most urgent. He observed that the largest portion of our life passes while we are doing ill, a good share while we are doing nothing, and the whole while we are doing something other than what we should. People spend their 20s preparing for their 30s, their 30s building for their 40s, and their 40s planning for retirement, always assuming that real life will begin at some future point. Seneca saw this pattern everywhere in Rome and called it the greatest waste of all. He wrote to Lucilius that putting things off is the biggest waste of life because it snatches away each day as it comes and denies us the present by promising the future. The person who says they will start living after they get the promotion, after the kids grow up, after they save enough money, is making a bet that tomorrow is guaranteed. It is not. Seneca watched powerful men die suddenly with their best plans still on paper. He saw fortunes evaporate overnight and exiles imposed without warning. Life does not wait for you to be ready. It is happening right now whether you participate fully or sleepwalk through it. His advice was direct. Begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life. Do not defer your happiness, your growth, or your purpose to a future moment that may never arrive. The only life you are guaranteed is the one you are living right this second. Seneca lived one of the most dramatic lives in all of ancient history. He survived the reigns of 3 emperors, endured exile, achieved enormous wealth and influence, and faced his own death with complete calm. But his greatest achievement was not political power or literary fame. It was the practical wisdom he distilled from every triumph and every disaster, wisdom that remains as sharp and useful today as the day he wrote it. These 7 rules are not philosophical curiosities. They are operating instructions for a well-lived life. Choose the one that challenges you the most and commit to practicing it daily for the next month. If this video gave you a new perspective on Stoic philosophy, subscribe to this channel for more deep wisdom every week. Drop a comment and tell me which of Seneca's rules you needed to hear the most. The man who mentored emperors now has the chance to mentor you, and all you have to do is listen.